Yep. So I work in an administrative position. So it's like 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, going to the office, starting with staff devotions, and then usually a day full of meetings about, problem solving and what's going on with the staff and what's going on with the kids and their school and things. A lot of times I hardly have much interaction with the kids at all because I'm working with the staff and the staff are working with the kids. So, it's a lot different than what you would think.
We were talking 2 days ago at lunch about this talk, and just, Stephanie, you and I were just discussing how it's really pretty monotonous at times. Some might even use the word boring. So just talk about that a little bit, what you were feeling about wanting to communicate.
Yeah, well, I just think that a lot of times whenever I have an opportunity to speak, especially to students, they want to know, what should I be focusing on? What kind of degree should I be securing in order to work in this field? And what I want you to know is that God really can use almost any skill set to work in this field. So what Jenny undersells what she does a lot, and it was hard to even get her to come and sit with us on this stage. She is a very, very humble person who would much rather be talking to you one-on-ones. This is really out of her comfort zone today. But what I want you to know about Jenny is that she is very gifted. God has gifted her administratively. And wherever we work, we want to work with the government. And hi, Pat. We've got a board member down there. Wow, that's my ADD coming through. You just saw it, full color. So, squirrel. So, what Jenny does is so important because in order to work with the Cambodian government, which is where she works, we need to have an awesome employee manual that the government can respect and that our employees can feel safe and secure working in. Just because we're working in the developing world does not mean there aren't rules and parameters. We still have employees that need to work legally. We need to work legally within the parameters of each country where we work. And so in Cambodia, for instance, they are under French labor laws. Who thinks that's exciting in combating human trafficking to learn all about French labor laws? That's what Jenny has had to do in order to keep our organization safe so that our staff can minister to these children. So when you talk about mundane, everyday working, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. But for Rapha House, we want to empower Native people wherever we are working to do this work. We feel it is very important, and I know Wade shares that sentiment through Blackbox. We want to be working with Native people in the cultures where we are working because they are far more effective at doing this work with the children that we serve than we could ever be. So yeah, when we talk about Jenny's mundane task, it's a lot of problem solving, it's conflict resolution, because people are messy wherever you go. And so that's a lot of what Jenny has to do in order to serve the children who come to our safe houses. We have to have a safe working environment and a safe legal structure for our people to work in. So.
In addition to tedious, even boring at times, and honestly, French labor law sounds terrible.
Tell me about it.
Oh, hey, there's Pat. Hey, Pat. She's a board member for Blackbox too.
She's
so
awesome.
That's pretty good. Maybe we could just have her stand for just a second and everybody. So I just remember Gary Hagen at the Justice Conference in Philadelphia. He gave a speech, and it was the one that I actually applauded the most at because it was the most real. And he talked about the tedious, the boring sometimes of doing justice work. In fact, if you think this kind of stuff is like just adrenaline rush, it's not. And so we really need people who want to get involved in this that have the ability to stick it out and just show up every day, day after day after day. He also said that it's really hard. So when I just even say that word, you begin to nod pretty hard, really hard. So if you're willing, just share what to you are the really hard things. I'll share after you're done what I would say is really hard.
I think in a lot of the time we feel like we're we're climbing a mountain. Like we're always climbing a mountain to achieve something. And so like this past year, it was climbing a mountain of the policy, which seemed like it was never going to end. And sometimes the really challenging thing is like from day to day, you pour out your heart and soul to, certain individuals or many of them, and then you see them make choices that you really wish they wouldn't have made, and that's just really heartbreaking. One of the challenging things about my job is keeping the morale of the staff up, because they're the ones that are hands-on with the kids every day, and like Wade was saying, they're not all happy angels that are just really obedient and ready to do everything we say. They're 25, or in the case of our other campus, 70 preteen and teenage girls traumatized living together, and so that they can work up some drama. And the secondary trauma that the staff carries is really weighs them down. And so to keep the morale up, to keep the staff supported and encouraged and everything, that seems like a mountain to climb. And so just in a lot of ways I feel like we're always climbing a mountain for the thing we want to accomplish. Tiring. Wears you out.
And there's many different, every day brings these challenges and some of them you never even see yourself walking into. But one recent challenge that I walked through with Jenny, that I got to watch her with our social workers. We had a girl who needed to go down to the police station. She had just been brought in. She needed to go down and do her interview with the police. We got to the police station, and there were about 40 police who were all on break at the same time, all of them, all male, standing outside, all of them are smoking and talking, and we had to just stand out there with this girl, this 13-year-old girl who was traumatized anyway. And, as her angst is building, as she's standing there watching all of these men watch her, just casually having their smoke break. And then whenever they finally were finished with their group smoke break, they brought her into a room where there were about, 15 desks all in a row lining both sides of the room, and set her right down in the middle of all of these desks to do her interview with this police officer. And all of the men came in, all of their eyes are on her, and here she is, this little girl who's been extremely traumatized, getting ready to tell her story, or even try to tell her story, with this audience of all of these male police officers. And so I watched Jenny say, "We need a private room for her to give you this interview." There is no private room, they said. This is it. This is the main police station where we work. No, we need a private room. And I watched her stand her ground against all of these uniformed Cambodian policemen. That's tough. And they didn't understand, because this is their normal way that they do business. They didn't understand why we needed a private room. So it's about also educating them how to do the best job that they can do, because they just don't know. They haven't been educated that way. And then finally, she pushed and pushed and pushed until finally they stood up, took us back through the jail. We actually went into the jail, back to the room where they kept the rice. The room is, it was basically just a covered, we were out of the sun, and it's where they store all of the rice. And they pulled up some plastic chairs, and that's where they interviewed our girl. But that's just one day, and it was exhausting. It was absolutely exhausting. The very people that should be professionally trained, to gather this information and protect the children, they are actually oftentimes re-traumatizing the children over and over and over again. And we see this in every country where we work. And so we're really excited that one of the things that Rapha House is trying to do now, we are trying to facilitate child-friendly interview rooms in the cities where we're working, where the police can actually come and interview any child in a private setting which is child-friendly. And we want to teach local law enforcement a better way to interview children. So that's just one challenge that I watched her walk through. Yeah.
I sit on a lot of planes, and it's pretty often to have a person next to me turn and say, "What do you do?" Or "Where are you going?" Or "Why are you going to this place?" And in my mind, I'm always thinking, what am I going to actually say, especially when I'm traveling for blackbox? Because if I say that, one of two things is going to happen. If I say I'm going to work with a ministry called Blackbox International, we work with these underage boys that have been rescued out of sex trafficking, but we provide the aftercare. I mean, if I go into the whole spiel, every time one of two things happen. The first one is they begin to move away from me physically and do not talk the rest of the entire flight. Could be 10 hours, could be 12 hours. It's like, I can't have anything to do with this. And I don't even mind that so much. Sometimes I'm like, great, I can read and watch a movie. But it's the second response that actually is the harder one, and it really feeds into what's the hard thing of carrying this out all the time working in this type of ministry, is they will turn and they will say, "Can I tell you my story?" And often it's one of abuse. Maybe it's things they've seen. Could be a family member. It's shock. This happens in my country. This happens in my town. And they begin to talk about it. And I just begin to feel this weight. I think it's the weight of the stories that's the hardest thing. It's going into the homes and meeting a boy and eventually hearing their story. And I feel this weight. Because the weight it's heavy, because the stories are heavy. When I come back from a trip, I was just in the Dominican Republic this weekend, and often people go, "Was it a great trip?" Yeah, no, yeah, no, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it was great. And no, it was listening and thinking and talking about this issue that's horrendous. And I'm not even the one who has to carry it. This boy does, but I hear the story, and every time we interact with someone, we hear the story. That's what I feel is one of the hardest things. What do you do when you hear about the evil of this world? How do you carry that? Knowing that a lot of times all you can do is just affirm in them still the goodness and try to help. I love what Jenny said. She said it's like this mountain. You're always climbing a mountain, and she's really probably better than I am, because I feel like I'm trying to climb a mountain, and when I get to the top, I realize it was actually a hill and the mountains are in front of me still. And I just have no clue how hard it's going to be or what we're going to have to do. But the reality is you just keep walking one foot in front of the other, day after day after day, doing this hard, sometimes tedious, at times boring, and at times difficult job. And so when people say, what do I need? What kind of career do I need? Or what kind of training do I need? If I want to really get involved in this, I have a heart for this, what do I need? Here's what I think you need more than anything. I think you need to have the ability to every day get up and do what you're supposed to do. I think that actually covers 90% of it. I just choose today to get up again and go do what I'm supposed to do, no matter how hard it is. No matter how hard it hurts me, no matter how difficult I think it is, no matter how boring, or even if it looks like we're failing. I remember just not that many months ago, sitting with our team going, I think Black Box is failing. I'm struggling. We had some kids leave. We had this issues with some of the government. Is this really going to work? What's really going to happen? And I just remember in the middle of that, people just saying, just keep doing it every day, every day. I remember Robin Seigers preaching an incredible sermon at Carterville talking about how we often give up right before the miracle. So when I flew down to the DR on Thursday, I got in the car with our country director, and I said, how's it going? And he goes, this is the best 2 months ever in the history of the ministry. That followed what I consider the worst 2 months of the history of the ministry. And having the ability to just keep sticking it out and letting God work, I think that's part of it, for sure. What would you say? Give advice.
Well, that's true. And I remember many years ago when Jenny approached me and said, I feel like this is what God is calling me to do. You remember what I said to you? I was like, are you sure?
And then you said, it's going to break your heart.
I remember that, and that's what I tell everybody that feels like they're called to work with us and that push us forward. You know, what you say is so true. There's an old Tom Petty song about, you can stand me up at the gates of hell and I won't back down. And I feel like that's what it is. Like, you have to understand I don't believe that the enemy can put stronger chains on a human than those of sexual trauma. And every day you go out there and you kick the gates of hell, and it hurts. It hurts watching children that you love and you have invested in, you know, go down, make those paths, make those choices that are going to take them down a damaging path, or maybe even a path where they will die, and you know they're going to die. That is painful. And sometimes, some days you just think, I can't do this anymore, you know? I'm going to throw in the towel and just go grill some hot dogs in the backyard, you know? I don't want to be part of this anymore. The pain is so great. But also the joy of seeing those that make it. I think that's the thing. That's the thing that gets us through. And you know what? Success looks different for every child. And sometimes what doesn't look very successful to us still is success in God's eyes, because their hearts are turning towards Him. So it's powerful.
And I think I'll just follow that up by saying sometimes the battle, you know, personally will be trying not to withdraw too much, because then, and you can almost even want to, you know, get apathetic or something, like numb or something, you know, so, but you don't want to be there. You still want to be alive in it.
I think there's this tough balance between needing to at times be able to detach a little, and you got to figure out kind of what you do, that you give you that self that space to kind of deal with it, and yet let yourself also fully feel it, to go ahead and identify. It's a great. It's about identifying the point where you even go, this is family even. And when they become family, it changes everything. This isn't just, I want to do something good to someone. This is us together fighting. And their victories are our victories. Their struggles are our struggles. When they're up, they're up. When they're mourning, we mourn. It's just this, to do that, you have to engage. And you have to live in healthy ways, too. And you have to figure out, how do you have some of that balance? I have a good friend, he said in the audience, he's going to die, that I'm actually pointing him out here, Roger Twitchell, who works with Blackbox. I realize now that the way he kind of wrestles with some of the really hard stuff is he has an addiction to ice cream. And there's a place called Bone Down. It's like a yogurt place, and I don't know. I've been there with him. If it's a really bad trip, like we were dealing with really hard things, he'll eat 10, 12 times at the ice cream place. So sometimes we're just like trying to deal with it a little bit, but the reality is the bigger answer is we enter into it with them. So does our national staff. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about the roles of national staff, like what do they do? But then how do you think they carry some of this? How do we help?
Well, there's definitely different levels. There's more administrative staff, and they're more removed. But then you have the counselors, and so they are weekly, you know, hearing the difficult emotions that the kids are going through. You have the social workers who are going out and meeting with the kids' families in their small villages and very poor, very desperate situations, and just feeling like so much desire to want to help fix their life and give their life hope too, so that when the kids go home, they all have a chance for success together. And it's like overwhelming, the amount of need. And the social workers, they're so wonderful. Their hearts are so great. They just constantly are like, well, why don't we do this? And they have big dreams. And I'm always like, okay, but here's what we can actually try to do, and it's like this, but let's keep going and let's keep working at it. And it's hard not to be discouraged by that. Then you have, the house mothers, and they're the ones that are really walking with the kids day to day, day and night. And, you have the handful of kids out of the group that are, always going to be really disrespectful, always just pushing the boundaries and breaking the rules. And, they just get tired of it. The staff just get tired of it. But also, what I love is I'll just look out the window one day and I'll see the staff, the counselors and the house moms and the kids, and they're all wrestling in the grass together or whatever, and they just laugh and play. And, those moments are awesome and refreshing. But, it's hard on them.
I wanted to say, is this one working? Yeah. I just want to say that I believe that you guys hold the key for healing for these types of children. I want to encourage you to keep moving forward in your studies with this, because our government, has a lot of money to throw at human trafficking. Corporations have a lot of money to throw at human trafficking. Hollywood has a lot of money to throw at human trafficking, but they don't have Jesus. And you guys really have the secret weapon. Seriously, if our girls can understand who they are as daughters of God, then they are poised for success. If they don't get that, they are really poised for failure. That's the honest truth. That's the nuts and bolts of this whole thing. Especially where we're working with traumatized children, they have been broken down to ground zero. Their self-worth, their value, it's non-existent. And I really believe that Jesus Christ is the only hope for rebuilding that sense of self-value and sense of self-worth, that you are a daughter of God. You are a son of God. You have great value. You have great value. Your life has great meaning. And if they can really wrap their minds around that, then they are poised for success at that point.
Our national staff on the ground, I think they're just the frontline people. They're all believers, and they're frontline people who actually carry out the things we would want to do to fight against the darkness. And I don't know how else to describe it other than this is the darkness. That the enemy hates people so much because they're made in the image of God and because they can worship God, that he's really okay with 9-year-old boys being raped, 9-year-old girls being raped. He's not only okay with that, he's like, enjoys it, hopes it gets worse, and hopes it goes from a worse situation to a worse situation to a worse situation. One of the things that we wrestle with in the Dominican Republic is just some of the struggles. Where do you even put kids when you find them? And often the places they go put them are as bad as where they were. We know of at least in one of the regions that the only place they know to put them is in the juvenile detention center, where right now the average is that whoever's put in a juvenile detention center will be raped within about 24 hours by either a staff member or another kid. So it's just this degree of one hell to another hell to another hell. The staff and even the other boys in the home end up playing this role, this hands and feet of Jesus. We had a boy come into the home not too long ago, and when he came, he showed up. It's embarrassing. There's shame, a lot of shame attached. Head down. What's this going to be? In his head, he's having to be thinking, is this going to be a good place or a bad place? And everything in life right now is communicating, this is probably a bad place too. But he steps in and one of the other boys recognizes him from their time on the street, says his name, looks up, somebody knows me. We have a widow from one of the local churches who works in our home as a grandmother, an abuela. She's great. She's really pretty feisty. I don't know how your grandmother's like. Your grandmother may be really sweet. My grandmother was more like, kind of feisty. You know what I mean? She's really feisty. Like, I've watched her play dominoes with the kids. I want to intervene because she is trash talking them so much. So it's kind of cool, but she immediately goes up and just grandma hugs him. And it's those little steps, and you add in counseling, and you add in education, and you add in all these other things, and this entire team that's working with them, and we literally begin to live it out, what it means to restore people, and eventually help them fully embrace this is the identity. You are a man of God. You can be a woman of God. We practice some pretty tough love with our boys. You don't get any passes and any excuses because bad things happened to you in the past. They did. We're going to help you work through it, but here's who you are today, and the future is about Ephesians 2:10. You were created with good works to do. They're still for you to do. And our highest expectation is that you're going to be a man of God, of course. Here's what that looks like. That's what we want to hold up to you. This is what we want you to do. The staff on the ground, that's tough work. Somebody asked, do they get counseling? And yeah, we talk a lot about how you need to debrief with each other and talk about things. They need breaks. They need the opportunity themselves to work through stuff they need to do. Here's what would be difficult. I'm not going to do this. Please, no one raise a hand. But if I were to say, hey, all of you are wanting to be in ministry, but you're going to at times encounter ministry situations that are going to bring up dark things in your own soul. How many have gone through abuse? How many have gone through? Same is true with people on the ground there. And so working in this brings up stuff they have to work through as well. Praying over them, providing support for them, engaging with them, and seeing the role they play is huge. I think the need is going to be just as great here in the United States. And I'm going to shift it just a little bit and go, talk to me a little bit about just the picture emerging of how this issue is even happening here in the United States. I think for a while we understood it happened a little, but a lot more in other places, but the picture is really emerging. It's a very different picture.
It is, and we're seeing that here in the United States, about 3 out of 4 cases are actually U.S. citizens. So we have a huge problem, especially with CSEC, which is the underage sexual exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation of children. And so this is a really huge thing that our government has identified we need to be combating. They're working with many different nonprofits. In fact, this week we have a staff member working with the FBI, getting ready for the Super Bowl, trying to identify child victims right now who are going up on like Backpage and just trying to seek those children out and try to protect them in advance of the Super Bowl. So this is a huge problem right here in the United States. I think that we also have the greatest opportunity at combating here because the church is so strong. And once again, this is an issue I believe this is an issue that only God's people can really solve in the end. Each one of us working. So it's a huge problem here in the United States. It's happening not only with people being imported into the United States and trafficked in, but it's happening with our own young people. The U.S. Department of Justice has a horrific stat that says in 1 out of every 3 cases of an underage person being on the street for any reason, it's going to take a pimp or a trafficker less than 48 hours to identify, not only to identify, but to identify and recruit them into sex trafficking. That's staggering. That is terrifying. So let me say that again. In 1 in every 3 cases of an underage person being on the street for any reason, it's going to take a pimp or a trafficker less than 48 hours to target and recruit. And it's preventable. This is something we can do something about. So,
I think when it comes to the United States, the information that's coming out is maybe painting a picture that we weren't expecting. I think it's easy to just assume, well, this must take place like in Las Vegas, or this must take place in inner city New York, or it's got to be in the bad places of America. And what we find is it actually takes place anywhere. I want to list just some of the things that are major factors for why trafficking may be taking place in your area. Connections to interstates, truck stops, casinos, Can any of you think of places that might be in proximity to those places? I mean, the reality is even Joplin, we're dealing with it here. Some of the stories coming out of even this region are just shocking. And somehow we have to deal with the shock and get past the shock and begin to go, so how do we actually respond to this, work against this? You may not be able to all go to some other country and work in those types of justice works with trafficked children, but here in the United States, everywhere it's taking place, there is probably a church within a mile. I'm just guessing with the number of churches in America. In this region, 100 plus churches, at least, within like a half hour of this campus, and this issue's taking place here. Is this something that we could actually do something about and change? I think we can. And I think we're also just realizing just how prevalent it actually is, because we're finally talking about it and looking for it, and that's a huge piece. When we say, how do you get involved? I will usually start with, look, awareness is huge. You learning changes this, because the first time we actually realize this takes place. Number one thing that I deal with working with the issue that Blackbox works with is convincing people it actually happens to boys. I sit down with a group they operate a building at the front of a slum in Calcutta, India. This slum brothel area, right now they estimate about 15,000 prostitutes work this brothel area in India. Chris DeWelt and I went up to visit with them to talk about the ministry of Blackbox and to get insight from them. They do some great work, actually pretty impressive, pretty incarnational work. And when we went to sit down with them, they said, hey, we need to talk to you before you talk to us. They told us what you were coming up here to talk to us about, and we just were like, that doesn't happen here at all. So we had no idea why you wanted to talk to us. But in the 3 days since you got a hold of us till you've shown up, we actually started looking for it. And now we realize it's everywhere in this brothel. We just never, when we saw boys and men in it, it never crossed our mind that some of them would actually be being trafficked. Awareness is huge, and in the United States, that awareness is growing, and people who can advocate with their churches to say, let's figure out some way to get involved here. That's huge. Praying is huge. Praying over this. You fight darkness with prayer. That's the number one weapon. If you were to ask me to rank everything we need, it'd be like, I need prayer first. I need people to get involved. Money is important. I mean, let's be real. All of those are really, really needed. But we just have to figure out how to get involved.
Absolutely. And I feel like so many of you already are doing the hard work. I know a lot of you are involved with local church youth ministries, and I feel like that's really where it's at. Everywhere I go, youth workers in the churches are asking me, I want to do something. What can I do? And I just turn it back on them and I say, you already are. You already are. You are the wall watcher for the children in your realm of influence. You are standing on the wall for your youth group at your church, because I don't want you to think that the kids you're working with are not vulnerable. Here in the United States, the greatest grooming method that's being used right now is through social media and online gaming. And who here works with kids in local churches? Almost everybody. Okay, can any of you raise your hand and say that the students that you are working with are not on social media? Can any of you say that? Can any of you say that the students you're working with are not online gaming? None of us can say that. And those are the greatest methods of grooming. It's terrifying. These are not only very, very vulnerable students who are being groomed, vulnerable children who are being groomed. These are children who you would never think could be groomed. And suddenly they're part of an international porn site. And you may think, Stephanie, that sounds very dramatic. No, it's very black and white. This is what is happening, especially with online gaming. You know, everything has changed, And people think that, virtual is just virtual, only the decisions that they're making virtually now have physical consequences. And you know that to be true. And so any of you who are working with students in any local youth ministry, you are already doing the work. You need to get educated. You need to make sure that the students that you're working with know what's happening. Study those cases. Know how these kids are being groomed, and then educate the children that you're working with or the students that you're working with to protect them and to protect parents too. A lot of parents are just clueless. My 11-year-old sits on my couch with his iPad. He has access to the world. That's terrifying. I would not take my 11-year-old down to the strip club and drop him off. But you know what? Sometimes that's what we're doing, because in these chat rooms, in his Clash of Clan chat room, I don't know who he's talking to. That's terrifying. So we have to educate parents, we have to educate students, because this is how they're being groomed, and this is how they're being trafficked.
We recognize that depending on the location will be the approach to bring children into this type of work. In some places it's trickery, it could be literally forced slavery, could be out of desperation. A parent sells a kid for money. In the U.S., it's grooming. And it's all about the same thing. We're working with the kids on the other side when they come out. We're trying to restore identity. The reason grooming works in the U.S. is so many kids struggle with identity. The grooming basically ends up being, hey, you're cool or pretty, or I find you interesting and let's hang out, and it starts this cycle. And what we're finding is it's actually thousands and thousands and thousands of kids. Just like on the ground, one of the questions, and we're going to try to hit a few more questions here at the very end. And if we don't get your question, just come down and talk to us at the end of the session. But, one of the questions was, what do you do with the kids when they come into aftercare? What is kind of the approaches, the care that they receive? A lot of it is building identity, but a lot of it is really trying to undo the damage that's been done. Most of our boys can't read, many of them can't spell their name, don't even know their letters. And so we start by restoring dignity through education. Many of them have never had a chance to talk about this stuff with anybody. Just imagine the shame associated. And so counselors begin to help them open up and tell their story. Eventually, we want them to be able to tell their story. Here's what life was like before it happened. And I can talk about when it happened, and while it was happening, when it stopped, what it's like today, what it could be like in the future. This is one part of a great big story that God's playing out in their lives, and so we're helping them learn to tell their own story, to see God in it. Obviously, there's spiritual instruction that comes along with those things, because I'm convinced the Holy Spirit is the one who does most of this work. And for those who find Jesus and the Holy Spirit is in them, the greatest chance for restoration obviously is taking place there. Anything you would want to add to what are some of the processes once they're brought into an aftercare situation that help the kids?
Yeah, just on the sort of the practical side of that, we build a team of people that are going to help that child. So it's the case management team, and the child's part of that, planning for their future too. So they have a counselor, social worker, a house mother that's assigned to them in particular, and we have meetings with them, and we make plans about what they want to accomplish and where they're going to be and how they're going to get there. And so we've been working on improving those the last year and a half or so, and it's been really cool to see how the kids respond to being part of that team, because we've been surprised at times to see, well, if you really ask them about themselves, they be able to tell you, here's my strength, and yeah, I know I have this weakness, I get angry quickly or whatever. And so that's they take more ownership than in taking the steps to work through that. And so, then we work on the plan. They need to get in education, get in school, or do they need to work toward a vocational training of some kind, and we just start planning out the steps for them.
And I think we would all agree, I know we would all agree, that trauma-focused therapy is very, very important. Our kids are not with us because at the end of the day, they're not with us because they needed an education. They are with us because they suffered a great trauma, and that has to be identified and it has to be worked through. And so that is definitely something that we all strive to do. We've had these conversations in depth through a Christ-centered approach. We want to hit that trauma. We want to go there to those deep, dark places and walk with that child through that. It's the most important thing.
Sometimes we literally have no clue what's going to be super helpful. Can I tell you something we've learned with the boys at Black Box that turned out to be a great way to help them work through some stuff? Boxing. So they get to punch other people, and it's been great. I was just kind of processing that when they were like, hey, the boys are now boxing. And I'm like, okay, I would have never thought of boxing as a part of therapy. But in like really controlled ways, learning how to do that and working out anger. Do you think these boys have anger? And so what are the different ways that could come and play into that? You know, I don't know what all God will use to help bring about restoration. I know that he's very interested and he knows what is needed. And so we figure out how to do that. Some of you are saying, how do I get involved? You know, a really cool thing that happened with one of the dorms here at Ozark is they adopted Black Box and bought all the boys' baseball gloves. And so last weekend they played baseball for hours. It's pretty incredible. Jenny, I'm gonna put you on the spot for this question. Be one of our last questions. So they were just saying, how do I actually get involved? What could I do? I'm picking on you because you're like much closer to their age than I am. You're great. I think you're amazing in what you do. I've had the privilege to go and visit her and in the actual work that she's doing there in Cambodia. But I also know that you're just normal. I don't mean that in any offensive way at all, but it's like, it's not like, you know, here's the most gifted person on the entire planet. Here has nothing to offer. It's just a normal person who was willing, and somehow you figured out, how do I do something? One of the questions was, how do we get involved? What are things we could do? What advice would you give them?
Well, I would go back to what you have already said in educating yourself first and just being aware of where the problems are. So going back to how I got involved, I started reading about it and kind of got obsessed a little bit with reading and discovering what was going on, and then came to that decision, well, what am I going to do about it? As a Christian, I need to have a response of some kind. And, you know, I was able to be available to go to Cambodia and be there. But the truth is, too, that I didn't have any training in management or counseling or social work or any of the things that I'm, you know, working with every day. But, you know, I think I was willing to be available. And for the first, you know, 2 years, I was ready. When I got there, I was ready to, you know, be doing, you know, spiritual leadership and things like that. Well, language was a challenge. And when I met with the team for the first time and I was ready to, you know, really do something to make a difference, and I said, but I'm here to be a volunteer and you put me to work, and what do you guys need me to do? And they said, we need you to teach English. And I was like, oh, man. Not want to do that. But you know what? It's what they needed at the time, and I committed to do it. And for 2 years, I just worked it out, and it was hard, and I didn't really feel like I was making a difference. But what was happening that I wasn't seeing was, you know, God was building the plan and working out the plan for me, and I was building relationships and learning a lot, and, you know, being available. So that's a huge part of it, I think.
We have 1 minute to answer this last question that was sent in. I'm going to switch gears completely, and the question was, do we actively try to love the traffickers?
That's a good question for you to talk about.
Yeah, that's hard. Here's what I know that I do. I know I pray for them too. And I know that they're often enslaved in as much darkness as what they just took the kids through. And I know that they need to be rescued as much as we need to break down doors and take kids out of brothels. We need to knock down spiritual doors into dungeons where these traffickers are, and they're men and they're women that are involved in this. And the church needs to show up. It's hard when you're the ones that are doing aftercare with the kids to spend a lot of time trying to work with the traffickers, but I think that's why the body of Christ is so big, and the power of the Spirit that helps us. I think there'll be others that can focus specifically on that. But for me, even just personally, I have to keep a check all the time. Am I praying for them? Do I forgive them for what they did to our kids? Because I'm asking God that he would forgive them, and I know he would and does, that they too could be restored and redeemed. And their issue's probably identity issue too. And slavery takes many, many forms. Okay, super thankful for you guys, of course. And we're going to be right